Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this special episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. We are into the 7th episode now of the Truehope Family Files, and this episode is titled Vindication and an Upright Judge. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Truehope Family Files, this 8-part special series here on Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. Last week was part 6, the media gang stalking and Rook the Crook. Today, though, is part 7. We've got 2 episodes left, and this episode is titled Vindication and an Upright Judge. Of course, Mr. David Stephan is with me today. How are you, David?
I'm doing well. Doing very well. Thank you, Simon.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, it's been quite the project that we've been working on over the last couple of weeks to get this out. And yeah, we're in part 7 today, so just a couple of episodes left, and it's going to be a very interesting conclusion. But we finished part 6 with a quite emotional, irate judge, Mr. John D. Rook, the Crook. Can you please transition us from that moment into part 7 today?
Yeah. So we had ended off on the last hearing that was taking place before the courts, right before trial proper, and we're saying, wait a minute, hold on. We still haven't got a full disclosure. There's missing evidence, fragments of it in multiple places. We have evidence that it exists. We knew it existed. It was relied upon by doctors, and they referred to it in other reports. And yet here we can't get our hands on it. And this is crucial evidence. We have not yet received a full disclosure to date. That means the 2016 trial was illegal. That means the 2014 preliminary hearing was illegal. And that means that this trial that we're about to engage in 2019, the second trial, is illegal. There's never been a full disclosure, and you cannot proceed with criminal proceedings against somebody unless a full disclosure has been provided to them for their defense. Whether or not the Crown deems it exculpatory or inculpatory evidence, it doesn't make a difference. It has to be provided to the defense for their benefit. And the Crown, the RCMP, and the doctors or the hospitals were involved in purging evidence throughout the entirety of this case to try to substantiate a false narrative that would support a falsified autopsy report. So we're going before him and we're saying, look, shut the case down, right? And if you don't shut it down, at least give us an adjournment so that we can afford a lawyer for Colette, because she's not in a place that she can emotionally represent herself. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we don't like your conduct. You've showed a massive apprehension of bias towards us. You cannot be the judge going forward. And so get off the case. Here's a recusal application. And he had rejected that recusal application. He wouldn't let it be filed before the courts. We had that on audio recording that he had rejected it. So then, and he became aware of the fact that we published that online. And so then he tried to pull the wool over everybody's eyes and change the narrative on the record and say that, yes, it had been filed and that we were just negligent in giving it to the Crown. And so then I went to present the audio recording, and that's when he blew a gasket and started yelling at me again, saying, I'm aware of that audio recording. It's not illegal, but it's improper. You're not allowed to speak to court officials anymore. Right, which is like, okay, well, aren't you a court official? I think that means that I get to leave the proceedings here, because that's what I'm wanting to do anyways. The whole thing's a farce. So it's a complete kangaroo court case that's taken place. But he rejects every application. And so now here we are going into trial proper, second trial. We had just gone through the preliminary hearing in 2014, trial proper that lasted a month and a half in 2016. Appeal in the spring of 2017, which was botched with corruption. One judge at least was willing to take a stand for truth, and he did. That gave us leave to go to the Supreme Court, May of 2018. Supreme Court, 7 justices unanimously decided it is wrong that we were convicted, that there was a major error in law. And so they send it back for trial again. Crown takes the bait on it. They decide to go to trial. So here we are now for our second trial. 7 years plus from the time that Ezekiel had passed away. So we get into trial. It's 2016, June 2016 now, and we find that we have a new judge, which is a beautiful thing.
Are we in 2016 now, or are we in 2019?
Did I say 2016? If I said 2016, thank you for correcting that. 2019, June 2019. Here we are, 7 years out, seven years and 3 months out from the time that Ezekiel passed away, and we find that we're standing before a different judge, and I'm not hopeful, and for good reason. There was only the Supreme Court justices made the right decision. I didn't get a good vibe from a few of them when I sat before them and we're hearing some of them kind of discuss some of the media narrative, thinking, how is the media narrative finding its way into a court discussion when it's not based on facts? They should only be relying on the actual merits of the case, the very facts that led up to where we are today. And so there, albeit though, they made the right decision and it was unanimous. So, okay, so I had a good taste in my mouth in relation to the Supreme Court. The appeal court, though, one good judge out of three, one who actually took a stand and made the right decision, even though two of them were in agreement that it was against case law what the first trial judge had done. The first trial judge was an absolute clown. I don't mean to undue disrespect, but there's definitely not undue disrespect. Stronger words should be used for him. He sided with the Crown. They were absolutely working in concert with each other. The Crown got everything they wanted during that case. We got almost nothing. Basically, every time that there was a decision to be made between us and the Crown won. And it was absolutely frustrating Sean Buckley. And anybody who was in the courtroom could just see what was going on, and that it was just we were being railroaded 100%. A conviction was necessary clearly out of this case, whether there was guilt or no guilt, and there was no guilt. The facts are very clear, hence why they had to falsify an autopsy report in the first place to get to this point. So we're sitting before a new judge, and I don't know what to think about it, but my initial feelings are it's probably not going to be good. Most of these guys seem to be bought and paid for. They seem to have a price tag on them. So I have an apprehension right off the bat for this justice, but I'm doing my best not to let it show through. I want to give him a fair chance, and I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked right off the bat. I had been absolutely run over by, I would have said Justice Rook, but there was no justice found in him, by ACJ Rook, or Rook the Crook as he's become known. He's internationally known for his attack on the freedom movement and sovereign citizens, if you will, or whatever. And he has made sure that he's found himself on all of those cases where these types of people are, and he makes sure that he just railroads them. Now, unfortunately, I had flags on my file that identified me as one of these free men. And so ironically, he finds himself on this case, especially when we start to blow the lid on the corruption that was taking place. So coming right out of that, from 1 week having him to the next week having this new judge, Justice Terry Clarkson, I've already, of course, I'm going to be a little bit apprehensive as to whether this is a man of integrity or not, because we've only dealt with a couple up to this point, and we dealt with a number of judges leading up to this point. So we get into trial, and he's treated me respectfully, which is shocking because self-represented litigants are supposed to be treated with respect. Alberta has the worst track record, the greatest amount of negative case law against self-represented litigants, to the point that the Supreme Court has weighed in on it to try to guide the different provincial jurisdictions on how they should be treating self-represented litigants. But Alberta has been the one who's generated the most negative case law that has actually caused really the issue in the first place, that the Supreme Court would have to address these issues. And clearly that issue hadn't been cleaned up. So here we are studying our rights as self-represented litigants because we're literally just getting abused in the courtroom, and I'm having to call Rook out for what he's doing. And so we get into the case, and things are going fairly normal, right? As expected, Crown is presenting their defense case. So here's how it works. The Crown provides all of their case. If they're going to be calling any expert witnesses, they notify us 30 days beforehand that they're calling the witnesses and what they anticipate the witnesses to say. So that's the first thing we can deal with. They get done their case, and then we get to move forward with our case, providing the defense. But because of what happened, we're going to get into this in a bit, the whole court case got completely muddled. It was the biggest gong show probably in legal history in relation to how a court case is supposed to roll out. First of all, based on what Rook had established leading into the case, and that those orders remained, is that we weren't going to qualify the expert witnesses before they gave testimony, but that we were actually in voir dire for days on end to find out whether or not they would be an expert witness before we'd hear their testimony, but yet we'd hear their testimony during the voir dire. So it became extremely confusing, completely backwards.
Right.
Okay, we'll work with it. The second thing is that the defense was testifying before the Crown had actually closed their case because they had an unruly witness who refused to testify in the allotted time that was originally scheduled, to the point that we're dragging this out months. So here we are, we're providing our defense, and this becomes problematic because now we've already provided our defense, and then the Crown gets to already still have their witness on standby, and then they get to question their witness based on stuff that we brought up in our defense. So it's completely backwards. So this is going on, but one of the witnesses, I want to cover this off just briefly. There was one of the witnesses, one of the doctors that caused us to apply for a mistrial back in 2016. And what it was, he hadn't been qualified as an expert witness. He was just a doctor. He was the first attending doctor to Ezekiel in the Carson Hospital after Ezekiel got out of that ambulance of 8.5 minutes to 12 minutes of no oxygen whatsoever. He comes and testifies, and he starts to cry on the stand in 2016, right? Like he just starts to cry. It's some big emotional thing, right? And he states that, you know, Ezekiel was just so dehydrated. And Sean Buckley stands up and says, wait, this is said right in front of the jury. We were never put on notice that was the Crown's position ever, right? And right off the bat, one of the Crown prosecutors says, oh, page blah, 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 this. There was an allusion to him potentially being dehydrated, but here this doctor saying, oh, just incredibly dehydrated, indelibly imprinted upon my mind, right? Here we are 4 years later, but yet he never made note of it. So it's this notable thing that gets imprinted in his mind, but he doesn't make note of it in the medical charts. Like that's a pretty big deal as you're about to transport him to the next hospital, that's communicated somehow that he was incredibly dehydrated, because that's going to be factored into how they treat him.
Right.
Yet there isn't any word about him potentially being dehydrated. It was actually my wife bringing up her doting concern that she was concerned that he might get dehydrated. And so as such, she's making sure that even if he's not drinking his water, she's going up with an eyedropper, not feeding him like the media was saying, but giving him water through an eyedropper just to make sure, okay, there's a score. Just constantly doing that to the point that I think she actually slightly overhydrated him. So now that's coming up. Sean saying this just got spoke before the jury. There's no evidence to support it. We're declaring a mistrial, especially given the fact that the Crown prosecution was aware that he was going to say it and that they never once brought it forward to our attention. So fast forward to 2019, this same doctor, now they want to qualify him as an expert. And the reason being is he can provide expert opinion, not based on fact, but just based on just his opinion. So it grants him much more leeway to be able to speak to certain matters without any evidence to support it. And they come with this report that he's going to speak on, provided to us 30 days before, saying that he's going to speak to how dehydrated Ezekiel was, right? But not based on any medical documentation, testing, anything, but just based on what's imprinted in his mind now, 7 years after the fact. So we get up on stand, and we absolutely just massacred him. To the point that we showed that he had a massive bias, and you can't be qualified as an expert witness if you have a bias against us. Now, this just shows how serendipitous the whole scenario is. In May of 2018, it becomes a little bit comical. May of 2018, right before the Supreme Court hearing, my brother leaks a ton of documents exposing all the various doctors that perjured themselves in the 2016 trial. He leaks these documents, pushes them out, and now they're all over, all online, and they're being shared all over, including in the communities, specifically in the communities that these doctors are working, to expose the fact that they had been involved in this dirty operation to basically crucify us as a family for their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
This particular doctor is in a small community, 3,500 people. I grew up there as a kid in that same community. He's in this community, and it's spreading like wildfire about his involvement, his particular perjurings that he had done within the court case in 2016, how he had lied, how he changed his narrative from one day to the next day, basically separating himself from what he actually documented back in 2012. Now he's spouting a new narrative that's more correct because he remembers it better now than what he actually made note of in 2012. So this goes out, and at about the same time, this doctor ends up on allegations of racism. And the reason being is he had this interaction with some natives in that community. The community borders a reserve. So there's a large native population, and there were some natives that he was aware of, that he ran into at this outside the store. And he started making some racial jokes about, oh, you guys want me to prescribe you some pain meds, right? Or something like that, like just something just offhand. Well, he gets called out on it and ends up under investigation on it. And at this point in time, leading up into the trial, remember, we had just applied for an adjournment for 6 months so that Colette could get lawyers. That adjournment was denied. Well, there was 3 lawyers. So one of them, Sean Buckley. Sean Buckley's traveling down south because he has a vested interest in the court case anyways, being that he had represented it in 2014, 2016. He'd come and watched in 2017. He watched the appeal. He wasn't the appeal lawyer. He obviously kept tabs on it in 2018 when it ended up in the Supreme Court. So now he's coming down to watch it as time permits. So I phoned him up and said, hey, Sean, I said, hey, is there any way that you can fill in as time permits to represent Colette? Because she's not going to be able to do so. And the Crown has separated out the different elements that she has to speak specifically to certain elements of this that I'm not allowed to speak to. So I can't even cover it off in the court case. Like, they were playing dirty. The Crown was pinpointing her, looking at the weakest link and knowing that it was an emotional mother who is still struggling with the death of her son. And they're targeting her, right? So Sean's like, sure, I can do that. Now he can't fill in every day though, right? Like, this is going to be a month, 2 months long trial. And he can't on a moment's notice be like, yeah, my schedule's wide open. Mm-hmm. So then there's 2 other lawyers that were sympathetic to the case. There's actually a lot of lawyers that were sympathetic to the case, that knew what was going on and just knew that this whole thing was a farce. But there was 2 that had a bit of time on their hands. So what was interesting is 3 lawyers. Jason Demers is one of them, a good civil lawyer, criminal lawyer out of Calgary and Lethbridge. And then another one is Ingrid Hess. Great lady, great lawyer. Anyway, so all 3 of them are jumping on board. And what they would do is they'd come and sit at the back of the room or behind me at a table while I'm cross-examining the Crown's witnesses. This is giving them time to prep and understand what's going on. They come in and mop up after me. So I do the majority of the damage. They come in and they clean up and miss or get any points that I missed. So it's actually really a beautiful process, kind of an interesting process. Meanwhile, my brother's sitting beside me as legally as a Mackenzie friend is what it's called. He's sitting beside me. He's handing me files because he knows the file inside and out because him and his team have been going through it now for over 2 years at this point in time. Or not over, sorry, just under 2 years at this point in time. So this doctor gets up on stand and we have to prove that he has a bias against us. Well, Ingrid Hess is the lawyer that represented the natives that he had been making these jokes about prescribing them pain meds, right, in a racial fashion. And so he had been investigated by the College of Physicians, and he had to write a letter to defend himself. And within that letter, he cited us as the reason why he was not in the right state of mind of the stress of what had taken place with the fact that we had leaked all of these lies. We leaked the perjury that had taken place. So all of his lies we had leaked online, and we put it out there, knowing full well that, hey, look, if we're on the wrong side of the fence here, we're going to get sued. And interestingly, Alberta Health Services did approach us and said, hey, pull it down or we'll sue you. And we said, sure, go for it. Sue us. We want to see you in court. And they just went away. But they figured they'd threaten. And we said, hey, this will be fantastic. We'd love for this to get litigated. And so Alberta Health Services, went, scurried back into their little dark hole. But they figured they'd try. So we were threatened to a lawsuit, but we didn't cave because we knew we were on the right side. So anyways, he has this letter that he sends to the College of Physicians. She has a copy of it. She knows that he is being qualified or disqualified as an expert witness. She's representing out of the blue. We just met her a few days before. She says, hey, look what I have. She's got a copy of this letter. And so by the time that we were done ripping him up one side and down the other through cross-examination for an entire day, and then showing, in fact, that at the end, oh, by the way, we have this letter, right? Like, can you tell us what this is about? Do you have any apprehension of bias about us? Oh, by the way, did you also have a conversation with the RN that saw Colette and Ezekiel the day before he went into crisis? Did you have a conversation with her saying that you should be careful about associating yourself with the Steffens? And he's like, well, yeah.
Like, oh my goodness.
You're biased. And so sure enough, he got disqualified as an expert witness, couldn't tell his false narrative about Ezekiel being dehydrated. That was never noted anywhere. It was so notable, but once again, it was so notable that he never made note of it, right? And never passed it on.
Unreal. The stupidity in some of these positions of real power in the judicial system, lawyers, these doctors, some of them, like, it just goes to show that, we really should be questioning and quite skeptical of, let's just say, everything in regards to what people are saying, especially these people in a position of authority. You just can't take their word for it right off the bat. There must be questions, there must be follow-up questions, there must be accountability, because this doctor is just clearly, and the evidence is there, lying, trying to take care of himself for his own mistakes, and just such weak, pathetic characters. And it just seems that Alberta, for some reason, seems to be a cesspool for these individuals.
Extremely corrupt. It seems to be an epicenter of corrupt agendas, Alberta, for some reason, because it's really interesting. There's other elements of Alberta that, it's like the Texas of Canada. It's more redneck, more freedom loving. So it's really interesting, the contrast where you see within the organizations, within the government organizations, how corrupt it is, but yet the people themselves overall seem to be more freedom, libertarian minded than most of Canada as a whole. Mm-hmm. So it's really kind of an interesting dichotomy, if you will, with what we see here. I was shocked because I thought that Alberta would be, one of the, going into it naively, thinking it would be one of the best jurisdictions for the judiciary, right? The court systems. No, they have the worst case law coming out. It's just really interesting. I thought that, medical system, you got these doctors that are from Alberta generally, no. The medical system is horrific. Alberta Health Services is probably the most corrupt organization out there. And it's the largest organization when it comes to medical system in North America. It's the largest conglomerate, and it's just corrupt to the core. And we have so much evidence of that. I mean, right off the bat, they were telling their people to shut up, not talk to us, even though some of them were our friends. Don't discuss the case with them. It was weird to have people that were considered, not close friends, but friends that I'm sitting there cross-examining on the stand, right? And realizing that, they had been muzzled by the Crown or by Alberta Health Services lawyers, right? And yet you're supposed to have access to their witnesses to be able to discuss things.
Yeah.
So interesting. So here's what was interesting about this particular case. Now, 2016 was a long time ago, but that was a long court case in 2016, a month and a half. we had only scratched the surface on the corruption. We had no idea how bad it was. And here we are. My brother has been going through with his team. There is 2 full-time individuals with him on a regular basis, and they're going through files and made some fantastic discoveries that ultimately provided closure for me in relation to the death of my son, where I got to understand what had actually taken place and that it wasn't meningitis. And and it made sense, because here I am confused for all these years saying, why didn't I see the symptoms of meningitis? Right? What? Oh, is it because I give him lots of nutrition? He wouldn't have the symptoms? No, he would have had to have the symptoms in order to go into crisis. He didn't have the symptoms. So I could never reconcile with what actually happened that led up to him needing an ambulance. And so they discovered it, and they discovered that it was simply just electrolyte imbalances, and that, we started giving him. That's why he responded so well when we started giving him the electrolytes, the night before. And that the next morning he wakes up and he's doing better. He's not 100% better, but he's doing like markedly better. And then by the time that we get into midday, that he has no noticeable symptoms, but then something happens and we don't know what happens. We don't know why it happens, but his potassium spikes, right? No idea. Maybe we could have found out. Maybe we could have discovered if they didn't cover it up. Maybe if they would have actually examined it, and there was a reason why they wouldn't examine it though, because it would have put Alberta Health Services right on the hook, because it was easily treatable, and it would have put all of the fact that he died, it would have put it squarely on the fact that there was criminal negligence within Alberta Health Services where they pulled that equipment out. Because had that equipment been in the ambulance and he got an airway, he would have got to the hospital without significant brain death. They would have discovered it about an hour after he arrived at the hospital that he had spiked potassium. They would have treated him with the calcium chloride, or maybe they used calcium chloride because that's what they had in the ambulance when they were transporting, when they found this information out. And he reanimated, started breathing on his own, heart started beating on its own. And that's when they overdosed him with the paralytic medication. So they would have easily treated it, and he would have likely been discharged 2 days later, right? From the hospital. Fine. No long-term issues. Yeah, big scare. The fact that we just witnessed our son stop breathing, he needed CPR for 11 minutes, gets to the ambulance, gets an airway, gets into the hospital. They treat him for the potassium spike, and boom, done. Like, everything's fine. That's how simple it would have been. So they had a motive to cover it up, because otherwise his death would have squarely been on a criminal negligence case against Alberta Health Services, and they didn't want to open up that can of worms.
No, that would have been devastating.
Well, somebody would have likely ended up going to jail for a long time. I mean, like I said, failing to provide necessaries of life, up to 5 years. Criminal negligence resulting in death, up to 25 years. There's a big difference, right? And so, and the fact that the paramedics for 1 year had been saying we need that equipment back in the ambulance, and Alberta Health Services refused to honor that request until the week after Ezekiel passed away. All of a sudden, all the ambulances in that area had that equipment. That constitutes right there that they knew they were wrong. They corrected the situation, but they already caused a death from it, right? So they didn't want to go there. So then they falsified the death, said to try to make it look like it didn't matter whether the ambulance had equipment or not. He was already dead. Nothing you could do about it. Interesting, because an hour and a half later, he's breathing again on his own. So he was, too dead for the ambulance to fix, but yet now he's in a different ambulance, and all of a sudden he's coming alive again. Strange. So the whole thing just stunk of corruption there. But so they're trying to cover that up, and so now, we're now cross-examining these paramedics that were part of this whole scenario, paramedics that I knew. And this is where it gets a little weird, going back to the whole corruption that was being exposed. Even though we knew all the files, we knew them inside and out, and you think that we would have made all the discoveries necessary over 2 years of digging in deep. No, we get into the courtroom, and I'm cross-examining the one paramedic. Great guy, very knowledgeable, very intelligent, and I've got it's called a PCR, patient care report. So what happens is they will have they'll have their computer system in the ambulance, and as different procedures happen at different timestamps, they'll document it. Okay, intubation attempt at this time. Boom. Intubation attempt at this time. So I'm cross-examining him on it, and there's a well-documented timeline, and it's meticulous, right? It's just like at this minute we're doing this, at this. So we've got this, basically 10 minutes, right? Well, 8.5 minutes of him being in the ambulance. No, it's just slightly over that, and it's literally minute by minute, but even down to the second, time-stamped with every procedure that they do. I get down to the bottom of it, and there's a couple events that are out of order. They're right at the bottom, but I'm like, wait a minute, these should be up here, right? And I look at the timestamp and I realize, oh, the time has been altered to be the right time, but they didn't correct the date. It had been put in after the fact, a day, 2 days after everything took place. But they didn't correct the day to make it, because they can alter it so that it fits into the timeline seamlessly. So there was a couple events that were out of order. And I said, well, wait, why is this? And he says, well, I put those in after the fact. I said, well, what's the standard procedure in relation to, these types of reports being done? Like, don't you close them or anything like that? And he said, well, yes, we do. We'll close them generally that evening or whatever, like once we're done, once we, finished with the patient, or, sometimes we'll finish them up in the morning or whatever, if it's really late or whatever, right? Okay, so that's excusable in that sense that, it's really late. So the next day he could have done that, but it was beyond that time period. And then I said, okay, well, hold on. So you close them. Is there somewhere where it tells you that it's closed? And he says, well, yeah, actually, if you look over here. And he shows us. And the particular report that we're working with, I'm looking at it and it doesn't say that it's closed. And it's a fax that had been supplied to the medical examiner's office and to a number of other sources. It had been disseminated. And I'm looking at the date and I'm seeing that it's not closed. And we're 2 weeks out from the time that Ezekiel had passed away. So I said, wait a minute, hold on. So we went through our disclosure because there was overlap. There was redundancy of all of these different reports. And we finally found that same report and it said closed. It said yes. It had an affirmation that yes, it was closed at this point in time. And we're looking at the date of that. But yet we're looking at the date of these other ones being disseminated where it's still not closed. So they can still edit it. They can still change the narrative. That was concerning. So I brought it up with them and said, well, wait, 24 hours? You normally would have it closed by? Why is this in the chief medical examiner's office arriving 2 weeks after the fact and it's still not closed? That you can still edit it? And that might have just been a mistake on those couple of events at the bottom where they didn't change the timestamp appropriately and they overlooked that. Mm-hmm. We don't know how many other events were actually in sequence that weren't supposed to be there. We don't know. But all we know is that for some reason, they were left open so they could edit it. And now, people might hear that and say, well, okay, maybe one off, just a mistake, whatever could have happened. Don't be so conspiracy minded, whatever. Well, when you start to see a pattern emerge, now you have time, reason for concern, right? So here's the next part of the pattern. This doctor gets on the stand. Nice doctor, nice lady, really. Younger doctor, really, she's about my age, Colette's age type of thing. But she came in, she was actually brought in by child abuse, right? I mean, they were going from every angle they could against us while we were in the Alberta Children's Hospital. Police coming in, 6 police, right? As mentioned in the previous podcast. Child family services at 10 at night. We're up till 4 a.m. being interrogated by the RCMP, all this stuff. They're hitting us from every angle. Well, this doctor comes in and we think that she's trying to help Ezekiel. But in fact, she's actually drumming up a case for child abuse, right? Which never went anywhere because there was no child abuse. And so we're answering all these questions thinking, hey, we're giving her, information that maybe she can help Ezekiel. Like, we don't know what's going on right now other than he's in a medically induced coma, which doesn't seem to have any record anywhere, even though multiple people were aware of that being the case based on what the doctor had initially said. And so she does up this report. And it's submitted. it's submitted into the files, into the disclosure, this particular report. And then we get into court and we realize she's referencing a report. I'm looking at a report. I'm like, mine doesn't line up with hers. What's this about? So then I stopped the case. I said, oh, hold on a minute here. I said, wait a minute. I said, yours has stuff that mine doesn't have. What are you using? Like, can I see? And the Crown hands me this. The Crown then goes on to say, addresses the judge and says, what Mr. Stefan is addressing is the fact that there's 4 different versions of this report out there.
4.
I said, hold on a minute here. I said, Dr. DeMello, I said, what is your procedure in relation? I know one of these is signed, one of them isn't signed, one of them has other like elements to a paragraph here that's not found in this one, which changes, how one would interpret this. What's your procedure here? Like when you're done with your report, is it closed somehow? Once it's signed, like, is it done? Like, or can you go back and edit it? Well, I can always go back and edit it. I'm like, oh, really? You can you? I said, so is that why we have 4 different variations of this report throughout disclosure? Right? Like, why does the Crown have a version I don't have? Right? Like, why are you referencing a version I don't have? Like, I want that version. Give it to me, right? What's going on? So once again, they have a way of leaving stuff open so they can change the narrative after. And we see this pattern emerge where other elements are being put in. At what date? We don't know. She left it in a Word document. We don't know when those edits took place. We would have had to gain access to her computer to see the saved history, if there was such a thing that we could find in there, as to what version was done when. And so was it a month out that she was changing it? Was it 3 months out? Was it, was it when the charges happened that they realized that they need to make sure that they get a very streamlined pro-bacterial meningitis narrative and that they omit everything else that doesn't say, or that says no bacterial meningitis? I don't know. All I know is that this is what Annie Savageau was blowing the whistle on in relation to the reporting structure found within the chief medical examiner's office, that people could go in and make a change to a deceased person's file at any given time, and that there was no fingerprints to identify that a change had been made.
It's crazy.
That was one of the things that she was bringing forward, saying the system isn't secure. And that she was also saying there's bureaucratic and political influencing into the causations of death. They're changing stuff. They're creating a different narrative to be pro-system and to be anti, I guess you'd call dissidents or freedom-loving people like myself, people that don't vaccinate, whatever, home birth people, whatever, right? Like that's what they're allowing it to be open to attack them, so that they can use the chief medical examiner's office as a weapon against the people, but yet to protect their system and their foster care system, where a ton of deaths are taking place that shouldn't be taking place, where criminal proceedings should be happening in relation to those deaths, and it's just not happening. They're being absolved through the chief medical examiner's office. So that's what we were seeing in the court case. All these discoveries just highlighting the fact that it's just fraught with corruption. And the judge, it was interesting to watch the judge through all this. You just see him, he's just like shaking his head. What the, as we're exposing this, and I make sure as soon as there's an element there, I'm digging deep into it and just 100% qualifying that I'm not interpreting it wrong. You're telling me that this is left open and it can be edited after the fact. So by the time that we were done with the court case, we identified, we drew a beautiful picture of the fact that this whole thing was an ever-shifting narrative of collusion that took place over a period of time, a month, 2 months, maybe 7 months. I don't know, because it took 7 months for that autopsy report to come in. Typically, we would expect 6 weeks. It took 7 months. We don't know how long they needed to collude together, these various parties, but we knew that they were colluding together. We have the records to show it, that the doctors from Alberta Children's Hospital were phoning the medical examiner's office to follow up on this. Why? They had no interest. They don't do that. That's not within their scope of practice. They're too busy anyways. They're supposed to be treating the living, not trying to identify what happened with the dead here. That's done and over with. It's out of their hands. And yet we see the records of them going back and forth. We knew that they were in contact, which is abnormal. So what was going on? Were they all trying to get their stories aligned? Right? That's what it looks like. And the evidence supports it. And the fact that we have a falsified autopsy report and every one of the doctors was trying to support that autopsy report, even though we end up with evidence that spoke otherwise. So I'll go into that in a minute. What was left out of the 2016 trial was a few hundred pages of medical evidence. What we had in 2019 trial is clear-cut evidence that shows that the doctor who phoned homicide, at the time that she was phoning homicide, she had one of her interns phoning poison control, trying to find an alternate reason as to why Ezekiel had actually gone into cardiac arrest. What happened? Why did he stop breathing? Why did he go into cardiac arrest? Because they didn't know. So they were running different. I think that they were actually trying to drum up an alternative attack on us if they could find anything on anything that we had supplied him as a supplement that would have potentially caused it. Boom, they would have attacked us on it, right? So they would have attacked us on the natural health element. They couldn't find anything. But what was conveyed to poison control based on the documentation that we have between the interim doctor, neurologist doctor, and the individual on the other line with poison control, is that they had already ruled out, based on the CT scan, that there was no meningitis. Gone. Not viral meningitis, not parasitic meningitis, not bacterial meningitis, no meningitis. Okay, they had ruled that out, and that there was no infection. And that qualifies exactly what the RN nurse saw the night before, or the evening before he arrived in hospital, when she checked all of his vitals, breathing, everything. There was no sign of infection, no runny nose, no mucus in the eyes, like nothing. And that's what got her thinking, well, maybe there's something more to this. And there was, right? There was an underlying electrolyte imbalance that was causing him to kind of wax and wane in his energy, right? As well as in relation to the appearance of being achy because of the fact that electrolytes are important for the very functionality of our muscles and to prevent us from going into muscle cramping. And so once we were dealing with that, all of a sudden, that's why he just appeared to go normal in less than 24 hours of giving him the electrolyte drink. So we have this taking place where this narrative is just building up and the doctors are trying to support it, but yet behind the scenes, they know that that wasn't the case. They knew that they'd already ruled it out in their testing, that, to the point that they wouldn't even give him a lumbar puncture, right? They wouldn't take a sample of his cerebral spinal fluid at the time of admission because it would have ruled out the meningitis, but it seems like they didn't want to solidly rule out the meningitis yet in case they need to rely on it, is what it seems to be. Yeah. So they wouldn't do the most solid test that would be like 100% no or 100% yes. They wouldn't do it. They said that he was too unstable, and yet at the same time they're saying, take him off life support and let's and donate his organs. Really? He's too unstable to have the test to determine what he has going on. If he actually has this infectious agent, meningitis, right? He's too unstable for you guys to do that, but yet you want to pull him off life support, which means that he's dead anyways, and you want us to donate his organs? Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And you want us to donate organs from an individual who's supposedly died from an overwhelming bacterial infection? That doesn't make sense either, right? You don't harvest the organs of somebody who is at risk of sepsis to the point that, a bacterial infection, and this was the theory, right, within the autopsy, right pleural empyema, which he didn't have because that withheld x-ray showed that he had clear lungs, but right pleural empyema infection gets so bad that eventually gets into, it goes into the bloodstream, gets across into the cerebral spinal fluid, and that's where he gets his meningitis from. That was the original narrative that they were going with. If that happened, you cannot harvest the organs of that individual, right? Because now you've got an issue where the body has a significant amount of bacteria throughout it, right? Which would easily come up in an autopsy report, right? Overwhelming amounts rather than these scant amounts of DNA of Haemophilus influenza B. So, yeah, so we got to see a bunch of corruption starting to get exposed within the court case. And it was actually really quite vindicating, even just going through the process, because we get to learn much more of what had taken place behind the scenes. And it actually qualified the fact that, we were calling them out for the corruption that they were involved in, but it just became so much more clear throughout the court proceedings as I finally got to cross-examine these individuals for hours on end.
It sounds like the judge was also like going along, obviously, with the listening to what's happening here, listening to the lack of answers, listening to the lack of evidence, and there must be so many question marks that, if they had the evidence to prove their argument, then there wouldn't be any questions, there wouldn't be any spaces or gaps where it's just like, what on earth has happened here? So it sounds like this new judge is just like, what is going on here? How has this been going on for so long?
Okay, awesome point. Awesome point. Point I didn't even think about there. Had it been Rook, ACJ Rook or Rook the Crook, I can tell you exactly what would have been happening during those proceedings. As soon as I would have identified an element of corruption, he would have tried to shut it down to prevent it from being solidified on the record. That was the pattern that had been going on at that point in time for the previous 8 months of dealing with him up until the trial proper. And so, yeah, this judge was open ears. And it was really cool because you would see when he would take note of something, like when something clicked, all of a sudden you'd just see his head go down. He's jotting down notes like, okay, that's going to be taken into consideration in his deliberation at the end of all this. And there was a number of points that, he wasn't getting it at first, and I finally was able to solidify it through the witness. So this is, whatever it may have been, like, maybe the report that was left open. There's 4 different versions of it that are out there. There's potentially more, and you can edit that any time. Like, you could edit it. You could have edited one this morning and supplied it to us, and we would have thought that it was produced, at the time that, Ezekiel passed away. So all of a sudden it just clicks and he just goes into note writing. And so we saw that happen a number of times, like, boom, point, boom. He's getting it. He's got the fact that this is a highly corrupt case. So yeah, it was really cool. Now there's another element to this as well when we back up, because leading up to the trial, we were actually cross-examining some of the police officers that were involved in this initially out of the Calgary police station, as well as the RCMP. And what was interesting is the discovery that the police, the police are the ones that are supposed to gather the information, right, in the investigation. So they'll gather the medical evidence. They'll get some from the chief medical examiner's office, the autopsy, whatever. They'll get some, they'll go and, do some interviewing themselves or interrogating or whatever, and get statements or whatever. So they're the gatherers. They're the hub where all the information comes to. And then they streamline it over to the Crown, which then the Crown says, yep, there's a probability of conviction. Let's charge. Boom, right? So the police were the ones that initially gathered the medical evidence. And when we saw how they gathered it, they requested specific documents by name, right? Now, I'm not a police officer, but as a layman, right, in a sense, although albeit my knowledge on medical information would far exceed the average police officer out there to a significant degree, I would never know what to request, because we had made requests with all of the different hospitals. Any touch point that had anything to do with Ezekiel, we made requests for any information. We didn't know what to specifically request. We had no idea the names of the documents. So what they did is they requested specific documents by name, which means that it exclusively would end up in the obtainment of those documents to the exclusion of all other documents, which is really interesting. So the first question has to be asked: how did the police know to request those specific documents and no other documents? And then that's what gets supplied to the Crown. The Crown then supplies that as disclosure to us. We think we have a full disclosure initially, and we work with that in the 2016 trial to find out later on that it was incredibly deficient, to the point that it omitted the other evidence, like what we saw, where they had already qualified that Ezekiel didn't have meningitis. Well, that's a pretty big one. Going into the 2016 trial, had we seen medical evidence that said we've ruled out meningitis, that would have given us a little bit more ammo against the falsified autopsy report, rather than just pitting Annie Savageau against Dr. Adiagbo, right? We would have been able to say, well, now there's other doctors as well that were saying the same thing when he was brought into the hospital. And meningitis is, generally you can diagnose it pretty easy. It's pretty clear, pretty clear. And they ruled it out. So So then we got to see that the police somehow were involved in the fact that they knew what documents to include to the exclusion of all of the documents that they would then supply to the Crown. That was a little bit more troubling to realize even the RCMP were in on this. It wasn't just Alberta Health Services. It wasn't just the Chief Medical Examiner's Office. It wasn't just the Alberta Solicitor General's Office with the fact that Jonathan Nichols supplied an 18-page letter to the medical examiner before he even started autopsy report, stating that Ezekiel basically died of bacterial meningitis, right? Already biasing the whole of it, basically telling him what he should find. We now saw that the RCMP was also an involved party in relation to moving this agenda forward.
Yeah, I think it's quite easy to understand the collusion within that RCMP and that Crown situation, because I believe that they believe that you are the bad guys and everything that they do is warranted, even when it's like taking an unnecessary phone call to realize to get the information about which documents to put into for this investigation. So sketchy. And I think if you've got any sense in this world, it's easy to recognize that many people are just taking orders. Many people's jobs are under threat. Many people's careers would be under threat. They have to think about feeding their kids and doing all these. So a lot of people, the majority of people will just do what they're told and look the other way. It's really, really unfortunate in this world, because we need more bravery. We need more courage. We need more people to stand up more than ever. And it doesn't take a whole police department, doesn't take the whole Crown, it doesn't take every individual to be corrupt and working for the system. It just takes few individuals to really instigate that on a downward stream, and people applying pressure and producing and giving orders. And yeah, it just doesn't take the whole system to be bad. It doesn't take the whole system to be full of bad people for it to kind of go sideways. It just needs a couple of people who are looking to cover their asses, really.
Yep. And everybody else just needs to play their role as that singular piece in the puzzle that all, when it comes together, makes a really deranged picture, if you will. But they're just one puzzle piece. I heard something, or I was told something by a lovely coworker, an older lady who had worked in the jail system for some time as well. But she came to work with us actually at Truehope. And I was working closely with her for a short period of time. And it was about 16 years ago. She just straight up told me this one time in relation, we were having a conversation. She says, everybody has their price.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I'm an arrogant fool, right? So I'm like, I don't have a price. And then I got to examine myself with that sitting in the back of my head as to the compromises that I was willing to make as the years went on. And it absolutely drove me crazy now that I was actually cognizant of it, that I was willing to compromise my values, just a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. When you do that enough times, eventually it becomes very slippery.
Yeah.
And you're willing to compromise your values significantly because you've become a master of rationalization and justification in that matter, as you've persistently done this for many years. It's a very dangerous road to go down. And I recognize that. Fortunately, I was cognizant of it enough to actually understand what it was doing to me. That in my arrogance at that point in time, saying I don't have a price, and then realizing I did have a price, that it, in some instances it was, over here, right? It was to please people that I would compromise my values to please them, right? Or in this instance, it was maybe, this will better my situation a little bit, right? And it's not really going to hurt anybody, right? All that type of stuff. So I had to nix all of that. But within that process, I realized, and I'm sure I'm still working on it. There's still just the odd little quirks. Like if I say something that's just slightly incorrect and it's like a slip off the tongue, and I'm like, wait a minute, is that actually correct? Oftentimes I'll actually correct it, and most people will be like, well, didn't really need to correct. That's just stupid, right? But for me, it's important, right? Because if I let it slide, then it's going to be easier to tell something a little bit bigger that's incorrect, and I'm not willing to correct that properly. and eventually my speech will be compromised, right? The integrity of my speech. And so I'm still a work in progress from time to time when I recognize those issues. But it's a very rare situation that we go through the uncomfortableness of correcting those issues within ourselves. And it's extremely concerning when we see, especially over the whole COVID agenda that's rolled out over the last 4 years, how many people have showed themselves to have a price. And for many people, whenever somebody says, I'm just doing my job, what it means is you just sold yourself to your job. Yeah. That was your price, was the keeping of your job, that you're now willing to compromise the well-being and the rights, the fundamental rights of your fellow beings, because you're just doing your job, right?
Yeah.
And we saw that. We saw a lot of people cave to the agenda to get in the job because I need it for my job. I have to have it for my job. And there wasn't a terrible amount of people, unfortunately, that were willing to quit their job. There was some that I'm aware of quite a bit, but not nearly as many as I'm aware of that compromised over travel, leisurely living, and jobs.
There was a lot of healthcare workers that certainly stood up to it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just think about the this culture of collusion within certain organizations, and I look at the public sector and I look at the private sector. I think for over years and decades, for let's just say the Alberta Health Services to become a very compromised organization, it's working in the public sector, and there can be levels of collusion, corruption, incompetence. All these get tolerated because it's not a private entity. There's no bottom line of profit as there would be in a private organization. If the CEO is being compromised or corrupt and it's damaging the business, within a private entity, that person's out, he's gone, he's fired. They're checking in on that all of the time. But within a public sector, when it's just our funny money, tax money that's just being thrown around here or there, very irresponsibly, these people who are at the top of this food chain can put these orders down and they can easily cover these things up. And there's no one checking the bottom line to see what's profitable, what's not. So it's so easy for these entities to become these cultures of collusion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much irresponsibility, and they're able to do it because they have endless pockets as they continue to dip into our pockets. And it gets to the point that we can't really afford groceries as a whole in society, but that's okay, right? Alberta Health Services still has access to your pockets, right? So yeah, unfortunately, when you take a look at that type of, it just breeds corruption. That type of scenario, it just breeds corruption and irresponsibility, with no repercussions.
Yeah, and I'm convinced that this will differ, but the best and the brightest don't go and work for the government. They just don't do it. They just don't do it. They get picked up by they get picked up by private entities because they get paid significant amount of more money. They've got more creativity and freedom to do what they want within their organization. And the people who go and work for the government, sure, they might be smart, but they are definitely not top of the class. And their biggest priority to get up the ladder is to just agree, say yes, and turn the other cheek when necessary. Not turn the other cheek, look the other way when necessary. You can see that. You see that with who's in charge of our country right now in Canada, and the people around those individuals. They're not the best of brightest people. You can see them talking they can't hold it together for 60 seconds within an interview. They're morons. And these are the people with significant power. And it's these people who have not gone up that ladder through competence, work ethic, and creativity. That's just not how that works. It's about just saying yes to the person above, not creating any problems, keeping the status quo.
Yep.
And it's sickening because it just de-evolves our whole culture.
Yeah. We're referencing generalizations that apply to the whole, but not maybe everybody, but the vast majority of them, right? Because there are some, but it's interesting because in my study into government years ago, in basically liberal arts education, not liberal, right? Like democratic, but liberal arts in relation to understanding the principles of liberty and all that. I was studying some of the principles established by the founding fathers, or things that have been communicated by them. And one of the elements of that was that when you establish a government and you attach to those positions good money, and it comes with authority, it attracts the wrong people. Money and authority attract the wrong people. And then you end up with the wrong people in authority because it satiates so much, right? Like there's a lot of people out there that are power hungry. You don't want those people ruling over you ever, right? Like we've all seen that. We've all, whether, within schools growing up, right? We see the power hungry teachers, right? Nobody wants to be in their classroom. We see, power hungry parents. Nobody wants to, like their kids are oppressed, right? But put somebody in a position of power where they now get paid to do that, and it becomes a recipe for disaster. And unfortunately, that's largely what we've seen with modern government, is that, and it just grows and gets bigger and bigger, and they bring on their friends and they create new departments. And now we have this big, monstrous governments that are not supportable, right? Yeah. With all of their programs and everything. It's just not supportable. And ultimately, it weighs on the backs of every, not prosperous, because it's hard to be prosperous, but every productive member of society ends up carrying the burden of this monstrosity of government. And so unfortunately, that's where we've gotten, because we have the wrong model set up, that we are attracting the wrong people into these positions.
For sure, yeah. The amount of world leaders that fall under the category of narcissistic and sociopathic is incredible. But let's get back here to the Truehope timeline. Yes, I love the little segues there. That's very, very important. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same thing as we're talking through this story, talking through the trial. So where are we now in the timeline?
Well, we're now to the point of the trial where it gets really interesting. So we've got Dr. Adiagbo. So we heard about him in the first trial in 2016, that he'd booked the day off. He's going out of country the day after his testimony in 2016. So we're in the courtroom till after 9 o'clock at night. And at this point in time, he is not giving us the evidence that he gave us in 2014, which ironically, same thing. He did the same thing in 2014 where we couldn't finish cross-examination with him. So we had to prolong the preliminary hearing for an entire month until he could be rescheduled in. So we've got this pattern emerging. Well, this time around, he's scheduled for 3 days, right? Okay, so we have adequate time. The Crown has scheduled him for 3 days, knowing that it's going to be hard to pull the evidence out of him, and that he is incredibly hard to understand, and that he is just an unruly witness, right? Just based on trial transcripts from the previous 2. So he gets on the stand first week of June, and he gives testimony. He gives his initial testimony. I think the Crown spent just over half a day with him. Okay, then they're done with him. Okay, wow, making good time. And now remember, this is a voir dire. He has not been qualified as an expert witness yet. So it's a voir dire, which means we're going to get most of the evidence out, but most of his evidence is either going to be for or against him being qualified as an expert witness. Once he's qualified, then we're going to do just a quick cleanup. So they're done with him in good time, which means I now have a full 2 and a bit days to cross-examine him if I so choose, right? So I start the cross-examination of him, and I've got a lot of questions for him. Why? Because he is the kingpin, in essence, of this case. He holds the key to us going to jail or not to going to jail. If his autopsy report is correct, we're in essence guilty. We ignored the symptoms of bacterial meningitis, and we're negligent as parents in a sense, or willfully blind, however you want to put it, and we didn't do what a reasonably prudent parent would do. So I've got a lot of questions for him, and I start to break it down. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and it's just kind of rolling out strategically. I'm setting him up. I don't just go in with a question. I set him up so that in essence he already establishes the answer that's going to be contradictory to what he wrote here. And the problem is, as a kid, there was a handful of times that I performed some big lies. I know it works. Yeah. You just can't make sure that everything is sewed up so like it's going to become evident somehow. If you hit it from 5 different angles, at some point in time, something's going to stick and it's going to expose it as a lie. So I'm doing that, right? And so I'm strategically setting him up. And as soon as he realized I set him up, and then I asked him the final question, he would blow a gasket because he realized that he'd been busted, and he would do the whole, this is typical teenager activity, right? Like you try to create a diversion. through a blowout, a spaz or whatever, as if it's going to divert from the fact that you just got busted online. And this is what he was doing in the courtroom. And so there was a handful of times that the judge had to say, whoa, 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 stop. Now, here's the thing, though. The Crown wanted them to testify by CCTV. I objected back in March of that year, saying nobody's going to understand him. He's already hard enough to understand in person, right? Nigerian-born doctor. I shouldn't even be using the word doctor. We don't know. But he's Nigerian-born, supposedly got his medical degree in Nigeria, couldn't pass his tests in the US, somehow got a license, still don't know how. It wasn't done through proper procedure. The transcripts identify that. And when I say transcripts, I mean, I'm talking, we've got, I think this is the vast majority of it, but this is all, the transcripts from his medical transcripts here, right? That we have access to. This was supplied to me. We're going to get into that story in a bit. I think that's actually next episode. But that was supplied to me by an individual who went digging deep and discovered all the discrepancies in his licensing.
Yeah.
So he's hard to understand, and he's now over CCTV, and he's pacing. He's pacing like a crazy man. Not even kidding you. Like, he is just irate over the fact that I'm exposing him, to the point that he actually goes more emotional on me, and starts to go for personal attacks. And at one point in time, like, he did a low blow attack in relation to the death of Ezekiel. And the proceedings just stopped, and the judge says, "Are you okay?" And I just had to take a second just to, so I'm not going to lose my cool, let it just simmer, and be like, yeah, and thank you, right? And then, all right, let's go back to it, right? And so he was basically engaging in ad hominem attacks type of thing, like completely unprofessional, and just elusive, trying to divert from the actual topic at hand. And so oftentimes he'd go give an answer and he'd ramble on for about 3 minutes, and it wasn't the answer to the actual question. So then the judge would have to try to rein him in, and then he'd say, "I need to tell you this," right? And it was just arguing, fighting with the judge. And the judge is like, "No, we just need you to answer the question," right? And so it's taking forever. Like, we're getting, like, I've got all this list of questions. I'm thinking I can get it done in a day, right? Like, we're going to be done with him in 2 days. No. So it gets to the point that we get to the end of the first day, and he says, "Oh, I'm not available tomorrow." You're not available? The Crown had you scheduled for 3 days. You're not available tomorrow? What are you talking about? And the judge is like, "What? Huh?" And the Crown's like putting up their hands like, "Oh, we don't know," right? And so now he's dictating the schedule, saying, "I'm not available tomorrow. I'm not coming in," right? I'm not coming to the courthouse here down in Indiana, where he's, being put onto CCTV. So it finally got to the point that the judge got, because he didn't come in the next day, so we had to reschedule. Now we're bringing in other witnesses who will fit in this tight schedule, right? So we have him on CCTV, I believe, for 3 total days before the judge finally loses it. Like, he's angry. He's ticked. He lectures the Crown and says, and he misappropriates it in saying, if Alberta Health Services is going to hire these people, and it wasn't Alberta Health Services that hired them, it's actually it was actually the Crown, this Alberta Solicitor General's office, the Crown, or Chief Medical Examiner's office, which is a subset of the Alberta Solicitor General's office. If they're going to hire people, they need to put them through courses so that they can articulate appropriately and actually provide meaningful evidence for the courts, right? So he gets mad at the Crown over this, right? So then the Crown decides, oh, okay, we'll fly him in, right? When they had lied before in the past, when they were making the application to have him speak over CCTV, they said that it'd be like 20 some odd hours of flights, and like this astronomical cost. And unfortunately, I didn't have the ability to, because it just sprung up. So I didn't get on my phone fast enough to show that it was like 7 hours of flights, you liars. I have right here a booking for a 7-hour flight from Indiana to Lethbridge. And no, it's not that much, but they were pulling the wool over, trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes to justify him being down south rather than coming up for some reason. Couldn't figure out why they didn't want him up here, and why he's being so elusive. So the judge orders that he needs to come in, and the Crown says, "Yeah, we're going to go with it." So he comes in July, and he's accompanied by two regular clothed individuals, which we would find out were actually RCMP in street clothes, right? That are accompanying him everywhere he goes, bathroom, everywhere. Like he's under protection. We're thinking, why? What's wrong with this guy? Like, is he just that paranoid? What's going on? Like we couldn't figure it out. And I'm sure there's still stuff behind the scenes that we don't fully understand as to what he was hoping maybe wouldn't get exposed, and we never did expose it. I don't know. But he was under full protection when he came, and now he's testifying. And it continues to get heated. It continues to get a little bit rambunctious as I'm busting him on these lies. And every time I did, it's like he couldn't pick up on where I was going. He's not a good chess player. I'm laying the groundwork. I'm asking all these questions to get him to substantiate what these medical facts are. And then I say, now what about this particular part of the autopsy that stands at variance with all that? Boom, right? Oh, Mr. Stefan or Mr. Stefani, right? He'd say stuff like that. Or Mr. Ezekiel, he'd call me, right? That's not how it works, blah, 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 right? He's just going off, right? Just like going crazy. I'm like, come on, seriously, stop it. Answer the question, right? So actually, I'll pull up something here. It's a little interesting. Here we go. Oops, that's the wrong one. It's about to pull up our own page. There we go. All right. So here's an article from, I think, the first time that he actually was there physically present, right? So now we're July 11th. So we're like basically 6 weeks into the trial at this point in time.
I'll just read that title for people who are just listening.
Yep.
Cross-examination of medical examiner becomes heated in Stefan's retrial.
Yeah. And so, so there were some very heated moments during testimony at the retrial of David and Colette Stefan on Thursday. The couple is charged with failing to provide necessaries of life to their son Ezekiel, who died in March 2012. Now, here's the interesting. The media keeps on parroting this because remember, at this point in time, Supreme Court, wrongful conviction, but yet here they're saying in 2016, a jury found the couple guilty. The first thing that people are going to infer when they're reading that is, oh, well, if they were found guilty by a jury back then, they're likely still guilty today.
Yeah.
When in reality, no. They were wrongfully convicted due to, right? So the media refuses to actually acknowledge the truth there. And then they say, but the Supreme Court of Canada ordered a second trial last year. Dr. Bamidele Adiebo, who was a medical examiner in 2012, testified for a fourth day in the trial. The doctor appeared via TV while he was cross-examined by David Stefan, who is representing himself. Thursday marked a second consecutive day of cross-examination. Okay, so I'm wrong. I said it was after 3 days, and then the judge ordered that he needs to come in. No, this was likely the last day, the fourth day. So now he's been 4 days in the trial. He's eluding the questions. He's taking forever. It's frustrating everybody. And then that's when he's supposed to come in. So I believe it was more towards, it might have been August, actually, that he finally came in person. Actually, I'm pretty sure it was August. Because I even took a bit of a break in the summer there, waiting for him to actually arrive. So he was holding the whole trial up. Meanwhile, we had already presented our entire case of defense before he came up, which is extremely abnormal and is a point of appeal right there. But let's go back. So the doctor and David Stefan went back and forth over details and information that were both included and left out of Ezekiel's autopsy report, such as the doctor not including the roughly 8 minutes Ezekiel went without oxygen in the ambulance. So kind of interesting. He was aware of the fact that Ezekiel went over 8 minutes or 8.5 minutes without oxygen, but he didn't even put that in the autopsy report as a potential contributing factor. He completely tried to hide that part of the narrative, which is what Alberta Health Services in general was trying to do until it got leaked to us by the fact that we know one of the paramedics, a family member, leaked the fact that Ezekiel went without oxygen. That's how we found out about it, not because of the medical evidence. They tried to hide it. And so here he tried to hide it and prevent it from ever becoming a part of his autopsy report. Now, here was something of interest, though. So I'm cross-examining him, and I'm asking him questions. I say, hey, how many pages did you get of medical evidence? What did you refer to in order to come to your conclusion of bacterial meningitis? And he says, I had all of it. I considered all of it. Like, you considered all the medical evidence. I considered all of it, Mr. Stefan. I said, okay. how many pages did you have? He said, do I have the whole file here in exhibit, whatever it was? Do I have the whole chief medical examiner's file? He says, yes, that's it. I consider all of it. He said, there's only 100 pages of medical files here. I have over 600 pages over here. I said, how could have you possibly considered all of it, including all the stuff that said he didn't have bacterial meningitis or meningitis at all, when you didn't have it? Well, I consider all of it. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You have 100 pages here, right? So I'm just like, I'm having to just start laying it into him. I'm getting frustrated at this point because it's just like, you didn't consider all of it. You're lying. You were given a very cherry-picked file from the hospital to get you to come to the conclusion of bacterial meningitis reasonably, omitting all of the evidence that said it wasn't that to now, this evidence may support it. You can twist it in such a way. So there was clearly a lot of collusion taking place between the doctors out of the Alberta Children's Hospital and the medical examiner's office for him to be given a very specific cherry-picked portion of the medical files, like less than 1/6 of the medical files. Absolutely crazy. So a point of relevance here that's going to come up in our next podcast, because that's actually when things get a little more exciting. That's when basically the lid is blown off in the corruption and the media goes completely silent on the whole of it.
Of course they do.
So I'm cross-examining him, and I'm no medical expert, but I'm learning a lot about it. And principally, like, I did very well in the sciences in high school, and I've been working in the natural health community now for 21 years. So it's not a stretch for me to understand the principles, right, of what's going on, right? Like when I get him to qualify the fact that, they increased his sodium at way too high of a rate and went from at the low bottom range of where you're almost hyponatremia to the fact that now you're well into hypernatremia, and what that does in relation to causing osmotic demyelination syndrome, where it just kills off the brain in the brainstem. So I'm cross-examining him on all this type of stuff, and he's actually giving me some really good evidence, right, in all of this, right? And I ask him, because I'm now going for an overdose here in how much fluid they gave him, because they gave him 600 milliliters of fluid within like the first 45 minutes, which is where the beginning of the spike in sodium came up to the point that it was actually causing brain death. And so I'm asking him, I'm setting the stage. And so first of all, we know what his weight is. We know what Ezekiel's weight is. And so there's a good chance that we can figure out how much blood he has on average. So I asked him, I said, how much blood per kilogram of body weight does an infant have? And he says, maybe 10 to 20 milliliters. I'm like, I'm trying to hold back the laughter right in the courtroom. I'm like, Dr. Adiagbo, do you think that perhaps 80 milliliters would be more correct? He's like, well, maybe. I'm like, okay, that changes my whole line of questioning. I can't even get him to qualify an overdose. I can't get him to do it because he wouldn't know the evidence. If he was given all the medical files and there was a clear overdose, if a child ended up with too much saline fluid that caused hypervolemia, including probably hypernatremia as well, that causes the osmotic shift of fluids from the cells to the extracellular fluid to the point that they shrink so fast that literally it severs the axons on the neurons, your brain cells, thus just ripping them apart and killing them. But the hypervolemia would create hypoxia, where you end up with less oxygen delivery because you've just diluted, that fluid so much that you don't have as much oxygen being able to get to the brain. And so he wouldn't even be able to identify if there was an overdose there. So if he had a file come across his desk, he wouldn't be able to take a look at it and say, child is 10 kilograms, will have 800 milliliters of extracellular fluid, right, or blood. And he just received, let's say, 800 milliliters of saline within this short period of time. Oh, clear cut case of overdose, right? Like that's going to kill him right there. He wouldn't be able to do it because he's not even conceiving that. He doesn't know how much, and this is a simple medical question. He doesn't know how much blood per kilogram of body weight that an infant would have, which is basically the same as an adult. An adult will have about 70 milliliters of blood per kilogram of body weight, and an infant will have slightly more, being about 80 milliliters of blood. This is simple, like textbook medical information, and yet he's not aware of it. And he's guessing 4 to 8 times off, which is significant. So that's going to provide a little bit of relevance moving forward, this type of information. That wasn't the only instance where he displayed that he was not medically competent. While I spent 5 days cross-examining him. So this happens. Then we're waiting on Annie Savage to come and retestify. But Dr. Adiyagbo has to be finished before she can rebut all the stuff that he said. And now our bills are racking up because she has to go through every transcript that he does. And we're talking 5 full days of transcripts that she's having to go through and review and say, he's wrong here, he's wrong here, he's wrong here. Okay. And she's undoing all of the lies and deceptions. And so she finally testifies by about September of 2019. So here we had just gone June, July, August. Now we're at the end of August, beginning of September, and she's now testifying. She comes and testifies and completely lays to waste the whole narrative again, but even better than she had in 2016 because we had more medical evidence. I didn't cross-examine her. Sean, she actually she didn't want me to cross-examine her for some reason. I'm like, all right, fine. And I think it's because she was aware of the information or where I was going to go in relation to electrolyte imbalance and all that. I don't know fully exactly what she had against it,
right?
But her theory, which she held from the lack of evidence that she had back in 2016, is that Ezekiel had viral meningitis. But this is what she testified, is that it wasn't established enough to have caused any issues, that it couldn't have been a contributing factor to him going into arrest. So then I had Sean ask her the question, was that viral meningitis so underdeveloped that there is the possibility that could have developed while in hospital? And she emphatically said, yes, yeah, it could have. Which makes sense going back to our discussion last podcast where they gave him 17 steroid treatments that compromised the immune system, and they had him on antiviral that would not prevent enterovirus, the number one cause of viral meningitis, from establishing. Now, he already had major damaged tissue, which is much more prone to infection from the 3 hours of hypoxic injury that he had while in transport to the Alberta Children's Hospital. So he had massive brain death. One of the doctors testified it was the most devastating CT scan she'd ever seen. And what she was qualifying was the fact that, yeah, he had brain death from hypernatremia, so osmotic demyelination syndrome, compounded by 3 hours of hypoxic injury. That's exactly what you would anticipate to see in a CT scan after that type of issues arising from medical intervention. And so now he develops viral meningitis while in hospital, but not developed enough that it would have created any issues. There wasn't enough inflammation. There wasn't enough development. It was basically surface level meningitis, if you basically put it in that term. So then it was also posed to Adiyagbo. I posed this. I said, look, is there any way possible that right pleural empyema that you said was one of the causes of death of Ezekiel actually developed in hospital? And it's funny because this was after I broke him down, right? This is after I'd already exposed him on so many lies. He actually qualified that, yeah, it could have developed, which means that he was lying in 2016 because he was saying how developed it was. And it takes about 6 weeks to come to full development to the point that it'll actually restrict one's breathing. And he was trying to allude to it being that well developed, that was a contributing cause of death for Ezekiel, when now he's saying, yeah, it could have developed in hospital over 5 days, which it wouldn't have been to the point that it was actually restricting his breathing. But yet they still felt the need to put that into the autopsy report and withhold the x-ray that showed that he had clear lungs upon arrival. So what's interesting about this is that everybody testifies. We're now almost 3.5 months total trial with multiple breaks in between because Adiyagbo was so elusive, trying to he was hiding something and, not making himself available. So now the judge is going to come out with a ruling. And so September 19th, 2019 rolls around. We have to come back because we're living 10 hours north at this point in time. So we're making multiple trips throughout the summer. So now we come all the way back down. We get into the courtroom. And there's a lot of people there, including at least one juror from the first trial comes and sits in on the verdict, right? So this is just a full courtroom. We're sitting there. We're thinking, how corrupt is this? How corrupt is this? I mean, this judge was good to us throughout the trial, but he's now been 2 weeks. Like, how influenced has he been? And he comes out and he starts reading his verdict and gets, he talks about how, Crown's theory was this, defense theory was this, that Colette and David Steffen didn't see these symptoms because he didn't have meningitis, and then found us not guilty. Courtroom erupts. Almost everybody in the courtroom is happy about this. Almost everybody, not everybody, almost everybody, right? Erupts. We're shocked. We can't even believe what we had just heard because of the level of corruption that we'd experienced through all the courts to that point in time, other than the Supreme Court. And he basically just shuts his book, and you can just see this look on his face, like that there's so much more behind the scenes, and he just walks out right after he finds himself guilty. But he's got a weight on his shoulders, like you can visibly see it. I think he knew exactly what he had just done. He knew that he was involved in one of the most corrupt court cases in Canadian history. He knows that he just found us not guilty when the powers that be and huge forces were needing this agenda to move forward. And I think that he knew that he was going to get hung out to dry. Because what would happen is the media would immediately attack us. In fact, it was funny because we're found not guilty. We're thinking, oh, this is great. Finally vindicated. The media attacks us. Now, this is at the same time that the whole scandal about Justin Trudeau's going on in the news with the whole blackface thing, right?
Which time?
September 2019 time. I think it was the first time that it really blew up.
All right.
And we basically sidelined that. The media used us as a focal point. So Justin Trudeau didn't get near the attention that he should have for his garbage going on. And so it was amazing because what the media was conveying is not just not guilty, right? Oh, right. No. Basically, they should be guilty is what was being communicated. Here's what they did and didn't do. And they're still parroting this false narrative, just spewing all the stuff that now goes against the court facts that had been established over the last 3.5 months, and making the public even more mad at us. The amount of hate mail was phenomenal in the days following, or hate messages, I guess mails and not email, but Facebook messages, all that type of stuff where people could get through to us. The amount was phenomenal. Like it was just this eruption of vitriol because here now we're found not guilty, but yet the public has been so convinced that we're monsters and we should be guilty and that we should be, hung in the gallows, right? Mm-hmm. So now, after that dies down, this lovely lady, Juliette Guichon, pops up, and I'll get into that in a second, I guess. Give me 1 second here. There's another media article that I want to share here. Oh, is that the one? That's the one, right? So then this pops up right away. Okay, coming right out of this lady. This is a newer article. You'll see this is from 2023. A whitewash. Judge investigated for perceived racist remarks won't face sanctions. So this is a nasty article about the judge, 4 years or 3.5 years out. But what it stems off of is the fact that Juliette Guichon, and so now I pull up another article here that says the judge's bizarre remarks in Ezekiel Stephan case signal a miscarriage of justice. Okay. So this was originally posted October 2nd, 2019. So we're talking 2 weeks out. So it's authored by Juliette Guichon, Ian Mitchell, and Pauline Alakija, or something like that. But Juliette Guichon is the head mouthpiece in this. Now, Juliette Guichon is interesting because I knew the name, but never knew who she was. And then I ran across her. And the reason why I knew her name was in 2016, she authored a number of smear articles on myself and Colette. And I thought, who's this journalist, right? Juliette Guichon. And then in 2018, I'm covering the Jeremy and Jennifer Clark case. And I am walking out during lunch break. And I see the reporters interviewing this lady that I thought was like the grandma of little John Wyatt Clark. I talked about that court case last episode.
Yeah.
And so I stop, and when she sees that I stop and I'm pulling up my recording equipment to just record whatever's going on, she becomes visibly distraught and uncomfortable and starts acting really strange. And then the whole thing is shut down right away. And I tried to ask her name, and she refused. And I said, "Are you with Child Family Services? What are you?" Right? 'Cause she was talking about this agenda about laying charges on bystanders of this type of situation. So what she was calling for in our case was that the midwife nurse should be charged, right? That my dad should be charged because he saw Ezekiel the night before and didn't have any concerns, but he should have had concerns and should have reported those, or should have made sure that Ezekiel got to the hospital, right? But there was no concerns to be seen, but she's saying that there was, right? So she's trying to there's this law in place that it had never been used, and she's trying to springboard off of it that basically it turns people into narcs, right? So she's pushing this. So I'm asking, who are you with? Like, you're pushing a Child Family Service agenda. Are you with Child Family Services? She refuses. So I had video of her. So I sent it to my brother and said, find out who this is. And later that evening, I'd find out it's Juliette Guichon. I'm like, I know the name. So I went and Googled her name. And the first thing that pops up is pictures of me and my wife. I'm like, why am I showing up on her searches? I'm like, it's that journalist. She's not a journalist. But yet CBC, as you can see here, this is a CBC article I have pulled up here, that she's authored this article. CBC, for some weird reason, allows her to publish articles as if she's a journalist. But in reality, what she is she's a bioethicist out of the University of Calgary, which, bioethicists are there to say, is things like MAID, right? Assisted suicide, is that ethical, right? Is abortion ethical? Is, vaccines that can cause these issues, are they ethical? That's what her job is to do. But yet she's found herself pushing the fluoride. Like, if you Google her name now, you'll find that that it's all about fluoride. She's pushing fluoride into the waters. She is a major push on. She was going against vaping in favor of big tobacco. She received the Public Health Hero Award in the late, I think about around 2012, 2013, I think 2013, Public Health Hero Award for the fact that she created such a stir against the Catholic School Board, because the Catholic School Board wasn't accepting the HPV vaccine, saying that it would increase or that it would promote promiscuity amongst young girls, and the fact that the HPV vaccine is dangerous in the first place. It's one of the worst. So she created such a public stir over it that she bent the whole Canadian Catholic School Board over the barrel, that they actually accepted the HPV vaccine, and as such she receives this Public Health Hero Award after how many young girls' lives have been devastated over the HPV vaccine now from her actions, right? So in essence, what she is she is a an industry prostitute, is what she is. and she looks like this just nice grandma, right? Like she really does. Um, it confused me when I saw her for the first time, but really she's just a really bad person. So what she does is she incites this claim of racism and gets all these peers to sign this paper, 40 of them, from Ottawa and from the University of Calgary and University of Alberta. All of these people that are part of her posse, if you will, she has them sign this document, lawyers and doctors, to basically attest to this, miscarriage of justice that Terry Clarkson had just engaged in by finding us not guilty and that he's a racist. So, we'll see here, such folk, or at the bottom here, could be evidence of racism, right? So then the media starts to really springboard off that. So within 2 weeks of us being found not guilty, the judge is now a racist. So disregard anything that he had to say.
What's interesting is the encounter you guys had at that other trial, the fact that that was her initial reaction rather than maybe even having a conversation with you as an ethics professor, right? To actually have a conversation with you to maybe get her point across, or to learn more about your point, or to have a discussion, but to actually have the reaction that she had just, goes to show what a coward, lack of backbone, and industry prostitute that individual has chosen to become. And I mean, if you're writing opinion pieces for CBC, it just goes to show where your paycheck is coming from and where your bias is going to be sat. Yeah, what an individual.
Yeah, clearly not on the right side of truth. For her to be extremely awkward in my presence, like extremely awkward. And that was the first thing. I'm just like confused. Like, I have to find out who this lady is because she knows who I am. And she was very visibly uncomfortable being in my presence. Like it was like, two magnets, putting them together, the two north facing portions of magnet just repulses, right? I'm like, who is this lady? What was interesting is that was at lunch break. She goes and attends the rest of the trial that day. I come back a little bit later than her. Somebody had taken my regular spot where I was jotting down notes and whatever. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll pick a new spot. There she is. I decided to go sit at the end of the aisle where she is. So at the end of the trial, she'd have to stand up and walk past me. I made sure that I delayed in getting out of there and packing up all my stuff as slow as I could. Almost everybody else was out of the courtroom. She still wouldn't move. She wouldn't get that close to me. So then I'm like, okay, I got to find out who this nice grandma looking lady is who's really a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Like, who is this person? So anyways, I found out who she was and realized, whoa, this is one of the pushers of the agenda. She works in the University of Calgary. I would bet money that she is probably in collaboration or in consultation with some of these pediatric intensive care doctors, and is probably actually saying, flag these types of people that come in. When they come in, this is how we handle it. We're looking for this type of situation.
Yeah.
I'm betting she's the kingpin because the University of Calgary and the Alberta Children's Hospital are one and the same. The Alberta Children's Hospital is a University of Calgary hospital. In fact, when I went and interviewed one of the researchers that had done studies on the Empower Plus, that was a building I went to. It was the different wing of where the Alberta Children's Hospital is. But yet she works for the University of Calgary, yet I was going to the same location, just going to a different side of the building altogether. Not the hospital side, but the administrative side. That's where your University of Calgary researchers and professors are.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I guess the lesson is to just be wary of sweet old ladies, I guess.
I would say so. I would absolutely say so. I think I had a picture of her pulled up, but I don't know. I don't know if it's let's see here real quick, because yes, I think we need a good look at what she looks like. Oh, see that? Oh wait, no, that's with my name attached to it.
Yeah.
So if we just go like this, so beware. She looks really nice. She looks like she would be like baking you lovely cookies and stuff for your birthday, right?
Yeah,
like that.
The fluoride thing is amazing. I looked her up as well, and the things she's saying about it is just like, it's just speaking out of a pharmaceutical notebook. It's just unbelievable. Like, you to be a scientist, a researcher, a person with education, and to be having these types of opinions about something like that is it's just almost hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. So shocking, the people that are actually pushing the agenda. You never think it.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens is all of these claims are being made. You've got doctors. There's a doctor out of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, who publishes. Sorry, no. They put together a petition and just laid out all these fallacious claims as to why the Crown needs to appeal and trying to make this a public uprising against us. Like, this is how big this is getting. The Canadian CMAJ, Canadian Medical Association Journal. There we go. Canadian Medical Association. Okay, they've got like 80,000, people, right? Doctors that are subscribed to them. Canadian Medical Association, right? It's like the AMA, American Medical Association, just probably 1/10 the size, because we have 1/10 the population here. But within their journal, the CMAJ, they publish an article on our court case, laying out all this fallacious garbage as well, and then citing the fact that there's this petition going on to petition the government to recharge us and to come at us again, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see all of these forces rising up, and they're all using these false claims that are coming from CBC. But you can see that the powers that be are doing everything they can in their power to make sure that this agenda goes forward, because this agenda is necessary for the monopolization of medicine in Canada, that you don't have a chance to go natural medicine without being a criminal, or homeopathic medicine, right? Or Ayurvedic or whatever. It's basically another attempt to remove anything outside of allopathic or petroleum-based Rockefeller medicine, right? And so you see everybody's rearing their ugly heads on the matter. And so shortly after that, we're coming up now, Thanksgiving weekend in Canada, anyways, which is in October. And so the Crown has 30 days to appeal. We're coming up on that time. We're thinking maybe they won't appeal. They got their backside handed to them in this court case. And I was self-representing. Like, it's a pretty big embarrassment.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm looking at him saying, wow, they're burning this judge to the ground. Like, his career is destroyed. He now has a complaint lodged against him with the Canadian Judicial Council, right? And all that. Like, he's just getting hung out to dry now. And I think that's going back to it. I'm pretty sure he knew that he was up for some serious backlash. And he got it. And it went on for years, to the point that finally in 2023 that he was absolved of everything. But he had to basically admit that he was wrong, even though he wasn't wrong. Mm-hmm. And we have the leaked, or not leaked. Well, they're kind of leaked. There is in public some audio recordings of Adi Agbo in the court proceedings that almost nobody can understand. Like, you listen to it and you can't make heads and tails of what he's trying to say. Mm-hmm. And it qualifies exactly what the judge was saying, that it was problematic, and that also his antics were unprofessional, which they were. And we actually there's a recording out there of him ranting and just raving, like just like a mad lunatic in the courtroom. And that audio is out there. And yet the judge had to admit that he was wrong and go through a course to make sure that he was more sensitive to people of different ethnic background. Like, no, that's not the way it works. I'm English speaking. The judge is English speaking. I'm the defense. I have a right. If I'm the accused, I have a right to be able to understand the allegations that are coming against me. It's a fundamental right. It's part of the court proceedings. You can't be more sensitive to people of ethnic background that are incomprehensible.
Right.
Where now it compromises the defense's ability to defend from going to jail. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just wrong. And so that's some of the fundamental principles found within the court system. And yet now he's a racist and he has to go through courses to be more sensitive to those types of people, so that when we end up with a raging lunatic on the stand, that's already hard enough to understand. But once he gets mad and he really starts to just garble his stuff, that we have to accept that somehow as a defense. Like, anyways.
Yeah, we're going to learn in part 8 about Eli Agbo's real ability to be unprofessional. So we'll leave that there for part 8.
Indeed, yes. So we're coming up to Thanksgiving. Friday rolls around. Thanksgiving weekend's coming up. All right, good. Like, time is ticking. Crown isn't going to appeal. Good. All right. This is great news. We've finally been vindicated, even though the media has created even more vitriol towards us as they continue to spew their narratives. We ended up putting in for retractions with the media because they kept on spewing all of this vile filth that couldn't be substantiated in any of the court cases. And so then, sure enough, they do their retractions, but they don't do it front page like they did when they smeared you. So nobody knows about the retraction. So they're still left with this taste in their mouth that David Steffen, somehow self-represented, got off lucky because of a racist judge, right? Like, it's just laughable. And so Thanksgiving goes by, and it's now Tuesday. And so, long weekend, whatever. And I get a phone call from a media contact. And he says, "Hey, so what do you think about the Crown's appeal?" I said, "What are you talking about? The Crown's appeal?" He says, "Well, they appealed. They appealed on Friday." I said, "What?" I said, "They haven't supplied us with anything." Well, once again, it's another one of their dirty tactics, incredibly dirty tactics where they're trying to play a psychological game. They had gone and filed an appeal to the courts on the Friday, hoping that the media was going to pick up on it. For some reason, though, not a single media outlet picked up on it. Nobody got the message for some reason. Not sure if they all took the day off early or what. Yeah. Right? Friday, and it's Thanksgiving weekend, but nobody picked up on it. But when they supply that, they're supposed to file it to us immediately. It's Tuesday. They still hadn't filed it to us. They were likely hoping that we were going to hear about this appeal, surprise, over Thanksgiving weekend and ruin that weekend for us. And just, like I said, they've been playing these psychological games to try to break us for years. And so now they're appealing. And then for the third year in a row, we'll get to see what happens on my birthday, right? Third year in a row, where more court proceedings end up coming into play. But basically, that's how we're left off, realizing, this is just like a never ending game as the Crown, comes in and relentlessly appeals again. Right. And we're already dead broke at this point in time from everything. So we couldn't really afford another appeal, but fortunately fundraising kicked in again and we were able to get somewhat prepared for it. So
amazing. Well, what a great place to finish off part 7 of the Truehope Family Files. It's been quite the journey so far, and we've got one episode left to go next week. That is going to be titled COVID, Court Corruption, and the Future for Truehope Canada. Thank you so much, David, for taking us through part 7 there. Some interesting ups and downs, some even more interesting characters coming into the conversation as well. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for doing this, hosting this whole thing.
Of course, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to getting this out in its entirety and sharing the whole thing with a lot of people, because it's not something we could have done in just one episode or one podcast. It has to get done properly, in detail and in depth, and I feel like we've done a pretty good job with that so far. And I'm really excited for the final episode next week. So be sure to tune in for that, everybody. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes. A star review on Spotify would be fantastic. Share this episode with friends and family if you feel like you want to do that. But that's all from us. We'll see you next week.